Welcome again, everyone. So today we're exploring really the first noble truth in a way. We'll be looking at that. Of course, the Four Noble Truths, as I think you probably know, many of you, given that I think I've probably had a session on them with many of you. It was Buddha's first teaching. And he really said it arose from when he found freedom in his own suffering. Um, and he saw this, as he awoken from the illusion of the false self, you could say. And he thought to himself, this is a subtle teaching. How am I going to convey this in words to anybody? What I've discovered, how can I possibly teach this? And for a while, he just sat under the Bodhi tree and said, well, I think I'm just going to sit here for the rest of my life under this tree because I can't fathom how I can, use words to convey what I have uncovered here. But eventually he decided that, as he put it, there's enough people in the world with a little dust in their eyes that he could teach. I like that, a little dust in your eyes. So I guess some of us have a little more dust than others. So before I go on, though, it wasn't actually his first teaching. Everybody's heard, right, that the Four Noble Truths is the Buddha's first teaching. But if you dig into the sutras, he actually was walking down the road and he met an ascetic, a seeker, and he was asked, the seeker saw that there was something radiant about him and asked, like, what have you discovered? What would you have a teaching? And the Buddha replied, I am perfectly enlightened one, the Arahant, the Buddha. So that was his first teaching. I am the perfectly enlightened one, the Arahant, the Buddha. And this guy sort of thought, well, this guy thinks he's pretty full of himself, and he just kind of moved on. So he thought the teaching was coming from ego, right? That I'm this big enlightened one, I'm the Buddha, I'm awake and all this. And the person he was teaching, of course, thought this was just another ego speaking and kind of just wrote it off and moved on, which is understandable, right? If you came across somebody and that was their teaching to you, you might kind of wonder. And at any rate, the Buddha, I think, probably decided he needed to shift gears a little and back things up. And the next teaching was, of course, the Four Noble Truths. And I find that interesting because he didn't just know exactly what to teach right away. He thought perhaps he could just tell people, I've discovered this, and people would see it and begin to understand it. But he quickly realized he had to kind of break it down into bite-sized pieces. And that's what he did with the Four Noble Truths, which is the teaching really that is common to all Buddhist traditions, as is dependent origination. I try to get down to those fundamental aspects of the Buddhist teachings, and I really do find the Four Noble Truths and dependent origination are co-rising to be those fundamental teachings. He said it contains the entire teaching and the entire path, the Four Noble Truths. So it's all there in a sense. When asked what he taught, the Buddha often said, suffering and the end of suffering, which is the Four Noble Truths. It's pointing out the reality of suffering and the path to the cessation of suffering. So it's also one of the characteristics of our existence. and the three characteristics, dukkha, or suffering as it's often translated. And I'll talk a bit about that translation. Impermanence and not self are the three characteristics. So dukkha is very prominent there, and it's also the first noble truth. Now, an interesting way to approach these truths is each truth, so there's 4 of them, has 3 insights associated with it. So for a total of 12. I don't know if you've been ever approached it in this way. And you can take the first truth and approach it in 3 different ways. You can understand it intellectually, right? Kind of understand what the concepts are that he's using here. What's he talking about? And the mind can kind of grasp that understanding. So of course we do use our minds, even though they're also rather chatty at times in our practice, but we do utilize this powerful tool in these teachings. And the first insight is intellectually understanding that suffering happens, that pain arises. We have this body that feels pain, and just kind of seeing that and understanding it. The second is the second level is you then reflect on it or contemplate it. So that's your understanding. Sorry, that's still the first level. You're contemplating it and reflecting on it in that first level. So you're logically and theoretically understanding it. Second level is you directly experience it. So you see it in your life, in your direct experience. And that's often what we talk about. You experience it in your life, you get the felt experience of it, you experience it in your body, you get the kind of the ouch and the wow of it, that felt sense of it. So it's no longer just a theory, it's an actual felt experience in your life. So that's the second level. And that's often where we talk about. Because I find with people in our society and the people that, especially most of the people that come to these groups, they read a lot of books and they get a fair amount of understanding. So we tend to, move directly to getting the learning from your direct experience. That's not discounting that theoretical understanding. It's just that we often overemphasize that in our approach to this practice. So the third level is knowing that you know. That's what Ajahn Sumedho calls it, is knowing that you know. And people often leave this one out altogether. Then you could feel stuck in your practice if you leave this out, because nothing's really changing in your life. So once you kind of get that felt experience of one of these truths, you could start to live from that truth. And that's the third level, is living from that truth. Letting go of judgment or the belief that when you suffer that you somehow fail or did something wrong. Mindfully responding rather than emotionally reacting, and really living that truth. The willingness to experience difficulties and view it as an opportunity to grow spiritually, grow in your practice. So that's really living. So the first one is knowing it theoretically, logically. The second is feeling it in your direct experience. And the third is integrating it into your life and living your life from that knowing. And so, of course, seeing when you don't live your life from that knowing and how that feels. It's really just being aware of how your life is embedded in this knowing or not. So you can approach each of those Four Noble Truths from that perspective. So we can work our way through that if that's of interest to people. The first noble truth often gets kind of jumped over, and almost like it's the truth of suffering. Okay, yeah, let's get to the good stuff. The how do I get rid of it? I don't need to know about the fact that it's here. How do I, how do I get rid of it? I mean, that's how our minds actually, approach this. In fact, in a Western culture, we really don't want to hear about, the truth of suffering. The Buddha called it a noble truth, that human existence involves pain and suffering. I think, if he sort of sprung up today, he'd probably have to call it one crummy truth and three noble truths, because nobody wants to really sees it as a noble truth. But I'd like to really present it as a noble truth and not a crummy truth or a horrible truth, something to be avoided. It really just the realizing of the first noble truth can be extremely empowering, extremely freeing. Just that one, you can work with it. It's so many levels, and at such deeper and deeper levels. So sometimes we use the term dukkha as a shorthand for unpleasant events. I don't know if you hear that sometimes. I'm having a dukkha day, or that kind of thing. And that's really you can sort of see the subtle sense of aversion in that way of referring to dukkha. The teaching wasn't intended in that way. In fact, that's kind of an inaccurate way to characterize dukkha. It's there's a sense of aversion in that, and we're actually, the practice is to accept, not to be adverse to the pain and difficulties that arise in our life. We're not trying to avoid, in a sense, the pain and difficulties that arise. I mean, you do things in your day. You don't look for trouble, but things happen. I knew I was giving this talk and was just speaking with Vida, and we're organizing like a little short canoe trip. And Vida said, "Oh, you remember the last canoe trip we went on, or this not the last one, but the one before the last one? We went on this canoe trip to Lavarandri, and we got in our canoes and we paddled 20 kilometers, and we got to the campsite, set up the tent, and we realized we didn't bring our sleeping bags, and it was quite a cool evening, and we had nothing to stay, to sleep in. So there's some serious difficulty here. This is part of being humans. Shit happens, stuff goes wrong, and the mind can jump to blame. Whose fault is it, and so on and so forth. But at this point, we had to make the best of the evening and then paddle back to the start and rent some sleeping bags, and then set out again. But I remembered that as she brought it up, and how we really just kind of rolled with it. We ended up having to sort of cuddle under. We also have these sheet liners that we bring for our sleeping bags. So we had those, and we kind of got into one, and we cuddled and had every piece of clothing and hats, and we always had all this on, and we managed to to stay warm enough. So it was actually not an unpleasant evening at all. But you could just see how that could become very much dukkha, or just intense suffering. And then as I was writing the talk and thinking about it, we were doing some renovations at the cottage, and we got a new refrigerator, and there were a few friends there as well. And the refrigerator came, and it didn't fit in the hole. And of course, one of my friends said, "Oh no, what are you going to do? This is terrible." And I said, "Well, I'm going to asked the nice young man, and they had to like lug it all the way down the driveway because they couldn't get the truck. I'm going to have to ask the nice men if they'll take it back." And so I did, and they said yes. And but again, it was just to see the different responses and reactions that people have to that kind of event, right? It varies a lot, from just like, oh my God, what can we possibly do to kind of accepting that stuff happens, mismeasurement happens. Yeah. So the idea here is that anything can happen at any time, right? And that's the slogan that we've used in the past. So pain can happen, difficulties can happen. Life can be sailing along really well, and all of a sudden something can happen. And it's really shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, this truth asks us to really face that this is part of human existence, that aging can be difficult, illness can be difficult, and so on. So it's understanding that this is not a mistake or a problem, that this is part of being human, that all this, anything can happen at any time. We often view these kinds of things as a mistake or a failure or a sign of weakness. We don't often talk about the different types of pain and difficulties that we have in our lives. I mean, do you have friends that you can just be open with and say, "Oh yeah, this happened," just kind of this kind of pain is arising, or even emotional pain? We keep it. We tend to keep it to ourselves. So everybody's walking around thinking, "I'm really messed up," and everybody else seems to have it really together. But everybody's walking around. Everybody's smiling right now, right? We sense this because we nobody shares it because we keep it in. But believe me, everybody has shit happening all the time, and our lives will go, through these different levels and stages. Sometimes a lot of stuff happens, a lot of pain, a lot of difficulty, challenges, and other times things do seem like they're running fairly smoothly. But it's just the noble truth is asking us to really recognize that this is part of being human, that it's not a mistake, it's not a problem. Now, of course, the false self or the ego mind wants to be in control, thinks it can control everything. So saying that there's anything can happen at any time is the ego mind. Oh no, I'm going to control all this. The fridge was the wrong size because I didn't measure it. I got to make sure. And if I just, keep my mind a little more active and thinking more and more and more, then, this won't happen again. And, this is how the ego mind thinks. It can control. So this is facing the fact that no, we can't control what arises. Stuff will simply happen. Pain will simply arise. It's not a sign of weakness at all. Some people, perhaps you've heard, have referred to this teaching as all life is suffering. I've had people ask me that question. I've heard that, that seems kind of depressing. The Buddha says that all life is suffering, and why did the Buddha say that? And really, the Buddha didn't say that. That is an inaccurate characterization of the teaching. He didn't say that we feel pain and unhappiness at all times. All the time we feel pain. And he said that pain and suffering is an unavoidable part of being human, and that it can be known and responded to wisely. So he didn't say that, life is, we're just all miserable all the time, and that's just, that's your lot, and suck it up. And it's not that at all. It's just that this pain and difficulties, it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable, no matter how much the ego mind thinks it can avoid it. It's unavoidable. It's part of being human, and that with that we can respond wisely to it. Yeah. So there's different kinds of dukkha. So there's suffering that arises due to sort of external events, right? Just things that happen externally to us, events that are just occurring that can cause us difficulties and pain. And then there's suffering due to how we process or relate to those events. It's our emotional reaction to experiences or events in our life. And this is really what the Buddha is addressing. The extra suffering that we add to the difficulties in our life by how we relate to it. So if one of our ways of relating is, that shouldn't have happened to me. Why me? Or, that shouldn't have happened. Then you can see immediately there's suffering that's occurring. The mind is you're resisting what arose as opposed to it happened. What's the response? What's the wise response? Yeah. So it's really our response that we're looking at. So the three kinds of dukkha, you probably, I don't know if you've heard of dukkha. This is a kind of, everyday dukkha that just happens to us. The pain that you get a pain in your knee, or you stub your toe. It's kind of the unpleasant, or what's labeled as unpleasant physical or mental experiences that arise. Sometimes it's called intrinsic suffering, simply painful events, stubbing your toe, feeling anxious, pain that accompanies war, violence, disasters, injustice. This is called dukkha. This just pain that's arising. I was, really challenged in my practice when I had some physical difficulties around concussions. So that was dukkha. And I created a lot of extra dukkha or sankhara dukkha by how I was relating to it. It was a lot of why me, and how could I have avoided this? Some self-blaming, and a lot of mental proliferation around what was physical illness. So the dukkha dukkha came, and then I added to it with sankhara dukkha, which is another kind of dukkha. It's a suffering due to formations. The third type is vipar. I always say this wrong. Viparinama dukkha. Viparinama dukkha, which is dukkha in response to pleasant experiences. This is this sense of, this really pleasant thing is going to end. And there's the sense of anxiety or angst that's present even when you're enjoying something. And this can be a little more subtle. It relates to the law of impermanence that often leaves our cravings unsatisfied or not meeting our expectations in other senses. Something's going to be just wonderful. This canoe trip I'm going on is going to be fabulous. I'm going to be so relaxed. I'm going to be around a campfire, and I brought my nice little chair that sets up with my thermarest, and I've got a book. I'm just it's going to be so relaxing. Of course, I could build up that into my mind, and then it could rain, be cold. I could forget my thermarest. And of course, then, but even if I don't do any of those things, even if it's it's perfect, is it going to meet the expectation that I have, that I've created in my head, the image in my head? So even when we're happy and joyful, there's this underlying unease or dissatisfaction, because at a gut level, we know it won't last, but we want it to. So that's the third kind of dukkha, perhaps a little more subtle than the others. Now, so what is the practice with this? And I'm going to just I'm just really presenting you a kind of an intellectual understanding of this noble truth as a starting point. But I think with these noble truths, it's important that we get that intellectual understanding and really look, using your mind to see when that there is pain and difficulties in everyone's life. So you can see that, it's present in my life. Stephen is saying it's present in everybody's life. And you can start to see it. If you have close friends, you can actually talk about it. Like, I was just at this talk, and they were saying that, we don't tend to talk about the pain and difficulties that we have in our lives because we don't want to be seen as weak or a complainer or whatever it might be. But that, we all, just bring out into the open at an intellectual level that this is part of being human. And I think we really know it, right? Like we see illness, and we know that we could become ill at any time. This isn't meant to depress us or make us anxious. It's really just, it's facing a reality of being human, much like facing the reality that we will all die. That's the one true thing that everybody is going to experience. There's no one that, no matter who you are, or wealthy or famous or wise or whatever, we will all die, which is can bring a sense of suffering as well. So seeing this as part of being human and not a problem. So when shit happens, when something happens, anything can happen at any time, and when that actually occurs, and it is either dukkha dukkha, sankhara dukkha, viparinama dukkha, then we can say, ah, there it is. There is the unavoidable arising of dukkha. Shantideva said, we shrink from suffering, but we are attached to its causes, which is an interesting, we shrink from suffering, but we are attached to its causes. So this craving, clinging, which is, the false self thinking it's in control when wanting more of what it desires and pushing away what it is averse to. We're attached to that, even though we say we don't want the suffering, but we create it with this through the ego self. So looking really, I think, so first of all, realizing how that suffering is inevitable and unavoidable in this human body, mind, and also that we create extra suffering by how we relate to that first level suffering, how we create more suffering by how we relate, process, and react to it. And partly we react to it because the ego self doesn't think it should happen. Right? We react to it. We crave and we push away because we don't think this should be happening. The ego thinks that this should not be happening. The Buddha is saying it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable. So it just is happening. It just is. And trying to attribute blame or figure things out, just when, who was it? What's Elon Musk's mother? Elon Musk, the guy that has Tesla, the electric car company, and SpaceX. He wants to go to Mars. And he actually said at one point that he wants to put human life on Mars because he wants consciousness to survive, even if the human species makes the planet uninhabitable for humans. He wants consciousness to survive on Mars, which I thought was an interesting way to put it. But his mother wrote a book, and I can't remember the name of it. And she's of South African descent, but I think she grew up in Saskatchewan of all places. And she said, when things go wrong, when an event happens, it's goes wrong, the South African farmer says the next thing that arises should be a new plan. Right? So that's just a recognition that something went wrong, and the next thing that happens is a new plan. Not, why did that happen? That shouldn't have happened. Why me? Da, 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 which is just creating more suffering. It's a new plan. The refrigerator didn't fit in the hole. The new plan is, can we get rid of the refrigerator? And then if that wasn't possible, another new plan might have arose. Can I shorten the cupboards? Not, and so it's just a new plan. Shit happens, a new plan. And but when she wrote that, it really struck me as very wise advice. I'm sorry I don't remember her first name, but it's her last name is Musk. So yeah, a new plan. So whatever arises, we can respond wisely to whatever arises. I'll leave it there and open it up for any questions and comments about that talk or anything else.
So I'm wondering, excuse me, to what extent you think our tendency to not speak about these sufferings is contextual, like cultural or social group, or you know what I mean? Like, yeah, that people I think do in some circumstances speak about these things, and how much is that determined by outside circumstances, culture, whatever.
Mm. I mean, I don't really know the answer to that, but I think that perhaps Western society and its orientation to life and comfort and accumulation and so forth has perhaps led us away from facing this noble truth. And so I said, if the Buddha came today, he would probably have to call it, one crummy truth just to get people to listen, because hearing that suffering is a noble truth just doesn't resonate. So I think there is a cultural element to it. I mean, and you see different people in different countries relate to difficulties in different ways. Some cultures are more open, for sure, in talking about their difficulties. I lived in the Philippines for 2 years, and the Filipinos, from what I saw of their culture in only 2 years, are much more open to speak about the suffering in their lives. In fact, enjoy telling people and then receiving compassion and love back. I don't know if you know Filipinos, but they love receiving that compassion back, and will be very comfortable having 3 or 4 people, caring for them, and really kind of revel in that feeling of love that they get from that. So yeah, I would see there could be cultural differences for sure. And and that's not saying all Westerners are the same either, right? I mean, that's such a kind of catch-all term because there's so many cultures in Canada, yeah, for sure. So yeah, it does vary, but so I did generalize a bit there, but I think it's something to explore in terms of internally for your own practices. That's something that you practice in terms of sharing in that way, or is it just more something that you personally hold in because you don't want to be seen as weak or a failure or inadequate in some way? So it's just something we individually explore as opposed to um, need to sort of theorize about the society. But it's good to recognize too culture. You asked about how culture influences us. Yeah, it does, definitely. And economic factors and politics, it all comes together to influence our behavior.
So when you talked about Sankara Dukkha, so the um, sort of the why me, I guess it is, and self-blame and so on. Um, you know, I think it's quite cultural because I think we learn that. I don't think we're born blaming ourselves for things. I think that's something that we kind of have to almost unlearn. Um, and when you talked about the fridge, you know, people in my family wouldn't take it in stride. They rail about, mistake, and and even in my job, when there's a mistake, okay, then there's that's a bad thing. We mistake equals judgment. There's a judgment attached to something that doesn't go right. So I'd be curious to know of a society that doesn't think that way. But yeah, it sure is nice to start to look at things that happen and unlearn the reactivity that comes with mistakes. And you mentioned mindful response rather than reactivity. So that's something certainly to take forward, that I'll take forward from tonight and try to integrate somewhat. Thank you.
So I'm definitely one of those people that struggle a lot with the Sankara, dukkha, the fridge not fitting in the hole kind of situation. I just don't deal very well with. And you talked at the beginning about in each of the Noble Truths 3 levels. So intellectually, I think I'm getting some understanding of what the process here, what's happening, and even I think I'm getting a felt sense. I'm sort of stepping into an observer and sort of feeling in a lot of those situations what's going on. And maybe the reactivity's gone down a little bit, but there's still an awful lot of reactivity in those situations. So that third step of integrating, I don't feel like I'm getting a lot of traction with that. And so my question would be, do you have any tips for sort of speeding up the process? But of course, in doing that, I'm creating an objective and I want to accomplish this and make the change. But is it just a matter of trying to be with the experience and just keep repeating the observation and get that felt sense, and then eventually something hopefully might change?
Do you want the fast track answer, or do you want the long drawn out gradual answer?
We want the fast track answer. We live in North America. What do you know?
So the Dogen and the maybe Zen has more of a fast track. So simply realize that that's just the ego mind, the illusory ego mind doing its thing, that it's not real in any way. It's simply an illusion, and just rest in that already always present still awareness that can just see the whole show, and just go back to that already always aware presence that can hold that can just hold that reactivity. That's okay. Reactivity arose. Awareness can know it, see it, and it just is. So that's the fast track answer. That awareness is already there. You don't have to do anything to create it, construct it, change it. It's unconditioned, unfabricated, always present, always aware, and it's there, and you can just sense into it at any time. So when reactivity arises, you can sense into it. When joy arises, you can sense into it. You can hold all those experiences from that awake, aware, still place. So that's the fast track. The gradual is you know that the mental formations that arise cause suffering because I'm seeing it. Okay, the fridge didn't fit in the hole. All these mental formations around it arose. The shoulds and shouldn'ts, blame, whatever it might be. This is suffering. This is what suffering feels like. Okay, and just go. This is suffering. This is what it feels like. The next time an event happens and you just kind of go with the flow, you just accept it for dukkha arising, dukkha arising. You go, oh, this is what the cessation of suffering feels like. Wow, amazing. And then the next time, so each time you just sense into suffering and non-suffering, the extra stuff, the sankhara, dukkha. You just sense into it, and slowly you train the mind, the mental patterns to switch around. it kind of dissolves, because suffering feels like a contraction. So you're just kind of training yourself to respond wisely in this way, because suffering is unpleasant. So in a sense, the ego mind doesn't even want that. Oh yeah, that's unpleasant. I'll just respond wisely. And slowly, as the reactivity starts to fade away because it's seen as unpleasant, you're just allowing things to be. And it becomes then a habit of mind, a pattern, a new pattern that you can live by. And then when you do react, once that becomes a mind pattern, of course, when you do react, it's like, whoa, what was that? It almost jolts you. It feels so foreign. Perhaps at the very beginning, when you don't react, it feels foreign, feels new, right? Well, that was really cool. I didn't react, and wow, I feel really light and peaceful and spacious. You keep, as you practice, so at some point, you become, that becomes your mind pattern, and when you react, you think, whoa, that feels really, it's almost jarring. Yeah, so that's the more gradual way, just seeing and knowing and recognizing when you add that extra suffering through the mental proliferation. And of course, you can practice both all the time, right? My practice more and more is just sensing into the still, aware place. Not place, but the still awareness that's always present. Already and always present.
That was very helpful, Stephen. And I was just struck, and maybe this is what you were talking about with the felt sense in any event. I'd sort of been thinking of the felt sense here and sort of becoming aware or sort of observing the resistance, how the mind is reacting. But when you talked about noticing the contraction, that's another element of it that I think actually for me might be helpful to just pay attention to that contraction and just observe, this is happening. I'm resisting, but there's this contraction. I'm feeling it at this particular place in the body. And that might be, I think, I'm just getting the sense that might be a good thing for me to focus on. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this week, I really just wanted to give you that more theoretical, intellectual sense of dukkha, and really grasp it at that level of understanding it with the mind. And I think that's important with this noble truth, that we understand that this is unavoidable, that pain and difficulty is unavoidable. The mind can understand that at a very concrete level. And you can go through the week and just see, oh, you can see it for yourself, and you can see it externally in others, that, oh, there's pain and there's difficulty. It's unavoidable. It's not humans. It's every sentient being. My dog is having a difficulty right now, right? He's suffering. He's got dukkha arising. He licks it. That's how he responds. But he's got dukkha. So I mean, it's just seeing it, and that, of course, that's what I practice for the week. So I was really being observant whenever it presented itself. What I'd like to do if your game is next week, really look at how we get the felt sense of it. Like what those practices around direct experience are at that next level of this, of just the first, stick with the first noble truth. And I'll say it again, the realization and integration of the first noble truth alone is life transforming. People think it's just the prelude to, you know, the others, right? The juicy stuff. But this is a noble truth in and of itself. It's not a, you know, a crummy truth to be skipped over. That sound like a plan? Yeah. So that I don't have a meditation practice for your week. I just have, you know, just be observant for the week and for your meditations. I've had a few people recently ask me about their meditations and saying they're having some challenges in maintaining a formal practice. And sometimes when that arises, it can be the attitudes we bring to our practice, that we were expecting something to happen. We have a preference for what might happen. So maybe noticing if there's any expectations or preferences around how our meditation's supposed to go, seeing if that can be loosened, you know, just let that go, that there's nothing in particular is supposed to happen. It's just being with whatever happens. And then maybe back it up and just do body practices. I've gone through difficulties many times during my life and with practice, and I'll go back to the basics of body awareness. So I would do body scans, yoga. I did Tai Chi for a while. You know, just go back to that sensing into the embodiment of this life. So that's if that's arising for people, any difficulties in practice, I always look to those, the attitudes to bring to practice. Really look at that. Or is there a preference for a certain kind of experience? Do we have a expectation that when we meditate we should be calm or anything? The mind should be still or whatever it might be. And two, to maybe back it up and bring it back to body awareness. So I just thought I'd throw that in as, you know, potential. And body awareness practice, regardless of, you know, where you're at, is a very important component of this practice. And we'll see that next week when we, you know, get the felt sense of dukkha, how important body awareness practice is. Yeah. So thanks for coming, everyone. It was a joy to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
Stephen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Hey,
Stephen.
everyone.
Great week. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye now.
Good night.
Thanks, bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
Good luck with the fridge.